understanding why those healthy foods modify that microbiome and how they do it, so that we have really a scientific and molecular understanding of how these different foods alter the gut microbiome and our biology. And so when we eat fiber, for example, that grows out bacteria that ferment fiber, obviously, and break down fiber. And so when they do this, these bacteria produce metabolites that are potentially anti-inflammatory and keep us healthy.
That was Professor Hansbro from the Centenary Institute. And I'm your host, Anthony Harcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today, Professor Hansbro is going to be doing just that for you. We're going to be talking about the good gut, how to get a good gut, how an anti-inflammatory diet really helps and supports a good gut. And this comes from Professor Hansbro's research. So his team at the Centenary Institute have over more than 25 years of experience exploring how inflammation contributes to the progression of diseases such as asthma, type 1 diabetes, arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, and even COVID-19, just to name a few. The good news is that Professor Hansbro's research shows that switching to a fibre-rich diet promotes gut health and reduces inflammation. He has just recently published a book that is shortly to be released, or it's actually out now as I record this, and it's available to you. And we're going to be talking about his research into gut health and how an anti-inflammatory diet really supports good gut health, and how eating fibre-rich foods really helps support good gut health and reduces systemic inflammation. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Professor Hansbro. Welcome on the Me&my Health Up podcast show. How are you doing today, Dr. Hansbro?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for having me on, Anthony. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to have you on, and you're really showing your dedication and commitment, being 3 a.m. in the morning where you are currently in South Africa, right?
Yeah, that's right. Very passionate about this subject, and so any opportunity to talk about it is I really jump at the chance. So thank you.
Is it a roadshow you're doing to promote your up-and-coming book that's about to be released, or is it a holiday?
No, I'm just on a holiday at the moment. There's a lot of activity around the book, and so keep going while I'm away.
Absolutely. See the dedication you have. So thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. And the listeners know what's coming next in terms of my first question. How have you arrived at what you're doing today?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long... So thank you. It's a bit of a long story, but I've been researching respiratory disease and how to develop better treatments, particularly for respiratory diseases that don't have any good treatments for a long time. And I went to a conference about 10 years ago that was all about respiratory disease. Went to a talk that was all about by an epidemiologist, and they said that people with this disease I work on, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or emphysema, a lot of people know it as, they said that people with inflammatory bowel disease, so gut disease, are 3 times more likely to have COPD or emphysema, and that people with COPD are 3 times more likely to have inflammatory bowel disease as well. So that really showed me unequivocal clinical link between the gut and the lung. And so around the same time, technology developed that enables us to sequence the gut microbiome. And so this is all the bacteria and its components and the things that it produces in the gut. That enables us to identify what are the differences between health and disease in the gut microbiome. And so things have moved on quite very rapidly since then, and we're now able to identify what genes these bacteria produce, how these are involved in producing metabolites and the components that circulate around our bodies. And so this has been applied to a lot of different diseases. And so we've been investigating how the gut microbiome is different in respiratory disease. And a lot of other people are working on on other diseases as well. What we're finding, and others are finding, is that the gut microbiome and the metabolites that they produce is very different between disease and health, no matter which disease it is. And so the concept now is, how does this change in the gut microbiome impact diseases in other parts of the body? And so what happens in the gut and with the microbiome is that we ingest food, and then this goes down into our guts and into our intestines. And this provides nutrients for the microbiome that then metabolizes all this food and breaks it all down. And then this gets absorbed through our gut wall. And this goes into the circulation and goes around our bodies and feeds all our different cells and tissues and organs. So then everything that ends up in your gut has the potential to affect everywhere else in your body. And so this really brings in dietary intervention as well. And so everything we eat then obviously goes into the gut. The things that we eat can only be used by certain bacteria. And so if you eat one type of food, that will cause the increase in growth of some bacteria. And if you eat something else, that will cause an increase in the growth of other bacteria. And so you can really modify the gut microbiome and the metabolites it produces, and affects all our tissues and cells and organs by the type of food that we eat. If we can choose the right kind of foods, that has the potential to keep us healthy overall and stop us having inflammatory and other diseases as well.
Wow, it's very insightful work that you're sharing, and the link and how you come across the link, and hence it led you down to a path to study the microbiome and the effects the metabolites from the microbiome have on our health and well-being. You mentioned the right type of foods. I'm sure the listeners are intrigued as to what I should be eating more of, and maybe what I should be eating less of as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'm sure your listeners have appreciated this before, but healthy foods are often always the best thing to eat. So lots of fruit and veggies and fibers and stuff. But what the book is about, and what we're really researching, is understanding why those healthy foods modify that microbiome and how they do it, so that we have a scientific and molecular understanding how these different foods alter the gut microbiome and our biology. And so when we eat fiber, for example, that grows out bacteria that ferment fiber, obviously, and break down fiber. When they do this, these bacteria produce metabolites, potentially anti-inflammatory, and keep us healthy. Whereas eat fruits and vegetables, that grows out other particular bacteria that produce other metabolites that can also keep us healthy through our circulation.
And as your research pinpointed particular types of fiber that are better, like insoluble, soluble fiber, or is it a mixture of both? What have you ever come across in terms of the variety of fiber that we should be consuming and how much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is really a focus of some of the research that's going on in our institute by our group and other people's groups as well. And so we're not 100% sure which exact fibers to use yet. There's a lot of studies going on to work this out. Generally, it's thought that insoluble fibers are going to be the best because they tend to hang out in your gut a lot more and grow out the bacteria that beneficially ferment these fibers and produce anti-inflammatory factors.
Listeners would be thinking, because it's very much publicized a lot and spoken about in the media, is around prebiotics and probiotics, and the prebiotic being the fiber or whatever the food is that microorganism is consuming, and the probiotic is actually putting the microorganism inside of us. What have you come across in terms of understanding, because obviously there's all sorts of prebiotics and probiotics. Mm-hmm. Is there should we be consuming so much probiotic food, or more focused on the prebiotics, actually eating the right types of food? And have you sort of looked at that angle in terms of whether we need to have more probiotic food in our diet, or is it more focused on prebiotic?
So that's a great question as well. And this always sounds like a cop-out, right? But it's not. But it's really dependent on the individual. But there are some general rules that we can abide by as well. So in order for a prebiotic to work, that we ingest that into our gut, and the beneficial bacteria break that down, produce the metabolites that keep us homeostatic and keep us healthy. However, you have to have those bacteria already in your gut. So if they're not there, they can't grow and they can't do anything. So then there is an argument that you should be taking prebiotics as well as probiotics so that you can ingest the bacteria as well as the fuel that they need in order to grow and keep us healthy. So then other questions are, well, if you take in the probiotic, can that bacteria grow in the environment in your gut and outcompete the potentially non-beneficial bacteria? So then, and this is quite controversial, do you then need to wipe out some of the gut bacteria that you already have in order to kind of start from a fresh slate, if you like, and then take in beneficial bacteria as well as the prebiotics that they need in order to grow to maintain our homeostasis? So this is really an area of cutting-edge research now that lots of people are doing. We're still not sure. People have been doing probiotic research for a long time, and really focusing on what are the so-called good bacteria. And these results, sometimes they're reasonable, but they haven't been as stunning as they might be. And that's because I don't think we've really nailed down what are the really beneficial bacteria and how they work at a really molecular level. And once we know that, then we can really molecularly target our diets to modify the bacteria in the right way. So who knows, in the future, maybe what we need to do is for each individual, you would sequence your microbiome, see what's there, see what's not there, and how that matches with any diseases or any conditions that you have, and how can we individually reverse those or modify those differences in your gut microbiome to potentially help keep you healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't a cop-out when you said, it really comes down to the, individualization. It's certainly what I preach in my clinic is, it really comes down to individualization. We're all completely unique and special and different and have a, different genome and as a result, different microbiome as a result of what we've been eating in the past and our parents and whatnot. So, fantastic answer, Dr. Hansbro. So just on that point of individualization, you mentioned, the future in terms of, people getting their microbiome assessed and then we tailor the diet based on, or seeing what disease we need to treat and then, giving them the right foods to treat those diseases. How far away do you think this will be?
Another great question, Anthony, is this field is moving at an enormous rate. So it's already possible for people to get their microbiome sequenced. We still don't understand what are the specific bacteria that are important, what bacteria and their metabolites are important in different diseases, and how those impact those specific diseases. So are they the same between different diseases? So is the gut microbiome in arthritis the same and have the same effects as the gut microbiome in emphysema or asthma or whatever? And it's all potentially going to be different. And another important factor is cause and effect. Does the change in the gut microbiome in a particular disease, the changes that occur in that microbiome, are they driving that disease or are they resulting from that disease? And it's likely there are some bacteria that are causing the disease and some bacteria that are resulting from that disease. So what we really need to work out, what are the cause and effect bacteria, and also what are the beneficial bacteria and beneficial metabolites, which are most effective in stabilizing or reducing any particular disease.
Wow, it's certainly a very complicated field in terms of researching. So there's no doubt that your research team is very busy in finding these answers and doing experimental trials. I was thinking in terms of we have, we're born with, a level of our microbiome, which, our mum, we obviously through the vaginal passage, we get, smothered in the mother's microbiome, and then through the breast milk, we get further exposure to the mother's microbiome. Are you finding, is there any link to if we move back to, or, back to our traditional way of eating, wherever our ancestors come from, is anyone looking at that as to whether that is going to really help? Because we have that sort of commensal bacteria that, research shows that probably resides in the appendix. So is it initiating back to that commensal bacteria that then may, by eating more traditional foods that our ancestors ate, that could then reverse the condition essentially? Is the condition just the fact that we've digressed so far away from our more traditional foods? Yeah,
sure. So obviously we've been living with the food that we've eaten for millions of years, and so we've co-evolved, and as our microbiota as well, to live in that environment. So there's some really, really nice examples of why this might be important. Okay. So if you take asthma, for example, so asthma has doubled or trebled across the globe in the last 30 or 40 years. Okay. And so that coincides with the amount of processed foods that we eat. And so there's a direct link there between processed foods and asthma. And asthma is a very immunological inflammatory disease. And there's a lot of people working on how the microbiome is different in asthma, in people with asthma, and how that can be modified with nutrition. There's now unequivocal links between living in a farm and having exposure to animal microbiomes and a reduction in asthma severity, as well as getting asthma in the first place. And now there's also unequivocal links between taking antibiotics during childhood that wipe out your microbiome and the development of asthma, as well as lots of other things that modify your microbiome early in life that then predisposed you to developing asthma. So these studies all really directly show that changing the microbiome impacts that disease and its increased risk of developing and more severe asthma. And there's similar links with other diseases as well. So inflammatory bowel disease is another one that's really taken off in the last 20 or 30 years. And so what is the reason for that? And so these are very clear links between the changes in our diet to a much more processed diet compared to what we had 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so if we start to go back to that and even way before that as well, and kind of going back to our roots or whatever, and eat the foods that we co-evolved to eat, then that's going to be beneficial for us and help control these diseases and keeping us and maintaining us in a healthy state.
Well, certainly, as I mentioned before, very complicated. It's there's so many pathways and areas that can influence the microbiome, the microbiota that we need to be mindful of. And I was just, from your research, is there because there's that stress element as well with the modern lifestyle, that the level of stress that will certainly perceive stress, but it becomes real if it's perceived, and our body then changes as a result of that perceived stress. Now, just in terms of sleep, so I read Dr. Matthew Walker's book on sleep and his research around that, and there's certainly correlations and around sleep deprivation. And so the modern lifestyle, like with lighting at night and shifting our circadian rhythm and biological clocks and things like that, what have you come across in terms of the impacts of stress and sleep?
Yeah, sure. So we don't really directly focus on that, but a lot of other people do. And yes, as you say, Anthony, there's a direct links there between having a good night's sleep, having a stressful lifestyle, and the maintenance of a healthy existence. And stress and associated events and sleep and circadian rhythms, as you say, have all been demonstrated now to be associated with changes in the gut microbiome. And so anything that does that is going to have an impact on your health. As a field, we've only been investigating this for 10 or so years now. And so we're still trying to work out the details of the types of bacteria and the metabolites that are altered with stress and a lack of sleep. So what can you do then? And so, again, it comes back to cause and effect as well. So if you get a good night's sleep and you have a healthy diet, will that modify your microbiome and help reduce your stress at the same time? So then breaking that cycle with a healthy diet could well have very beneficial effects in that situation as well as any other condition that we've been talking about.
And there's that element of exercise, isn't there, in terms of that? Yeah. Yeah,
so that's right. Exercise is the same thing. So when we exercise, obviously that gets your blood pumping. And so that circulates all around your body, including into the capillaries that are really fine between your blood supply and the lungs, as well as the blood supply around your gut also. So anything that gets that pumping will clearly affect the distribution of metabolites and bacteria around the body.
And back to the book, which is shortly coming out. So The Good Gut Anti-Inflammatory Diet that Dr. Hansbro has authored and with his research team. It's a fantastic book. I've had a sneak preview in terms what I really like about it is the how you share obviously the background and the insight around the gut and how it affects our health and well-being. But then you also give the reader a hand in terms of how to get started in terms of correcting their diet and supporting them. And through that, you mentioned the anti-inflammatory foods, so the ones to eat more of, and then obviously the other side is the ones to eat less of or avoid if you can. Can you give us a little synopsis of the book for the listener?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anthony. That's great. So really what we're trying to do now is that we all know that eating healthy is a good thing. And we need to eat more fruit and veggies and more healthier things, and we need to reduce our sugar and processed foods and all that sort of thing. Now, it's easy to say that, and we all know that, but we don't necessarily understand why. So this book is really trying to explain the science that underpins all of these things and why particular foods and particular diets and also particular ways of eating can be either detrimental or beneficial. And so this comes back to the individualization thing that we were talking about earlier. So, and this is like an anti-cop-out thing where we can then start, each person can then start to understand their bodies. And if they know about and understand how these diets and different foods and microbiota are impacting on their bodies and any conditions that they have, they can make their own decisions about what is best for that particular person. Why do they need to eat particular foods, and how might this benefit particular areas of their bodies that they might be concerned with? And it's not just about the different kinds of foods that we eat either. So although that is a big part of it, a lot of it is about how we eat as well. As you know, Anthony, it takes 20 minutes for our stomachs to tell our brains that it's full. So if you eat really fast, then you got 20 minutes of extra food consumption, which you can eat a lot of food in 20 minutes. Just by taking the time to eat nice, healthy food and actually taste it and enjoy it as you're eating it, as you go through your meal, you become satisfied a lot earlier, and then you don't feel the need that you have to gorge yourself with as much food as you can. And so the populations that live the longest, so these are people like in Okinawa in Japan and around the Mediterranean, they have these really long lunches and they eat until they're satisfied, not until they're full. So eating a good diet, not eating too much, and really enjoying your food can really make a big difference. And so with that in mind, right, this is going to be really negative. I have to stop eating all this food I like, and I've got to eat all this other stuff. But it can actually be a really positive experience where you can really enjoy the change in how you eat and what you eat, and it can really make a big difference to your health.
I love how you brought in the how we eat, and how important that is in terms of the whole picture of what, it's not only what we eat, it's how we eat it, because that's where digestion starts. And as you said, it's essentially where we enjoy our food is in our mouth. We start to massacate it and break it down, and that's where the taste receptors are, and so keep it in the mouth for longer and enjoy what you're having, and you'll need less of it. So I really love those words that you shared there. So how can the listeners best connect with you in terms of how you'd like them to reach out, and essentially, or where they could buy the book? Please share.
Yeah, sure. So we are really actively researching in this area. And so we've got a big program of work that does experimental studies with different diets and see how they affect cells. And then we are testing these different diets in the laboratory. And then those that we show are potentially effective are going directly into clinical trials for people with emphysema, COPD, but also the extension to that is lots of other different diseases as well. So we are really committed and focused to the research that we do, and we do think it can make a real difference and will inform this whole diet, microbiome, and health and disease conversation. So we're based at Centenary Institute and the University of Technology, Sydney, where we do all of this research. A lot of people that work in this area, and we're really committed to it and spend a lot of all our time doing this work. So the book is due for release on the 10th of January in all bookstores, I think. The opening is at Dimmicks in Sydney. That's going to be in February sometime, but it's going to be widely publicly available, and it should be easy to get a copy, I think. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty easy to find. So if people have a look, and so if they wanted to ask me any specific questions or specific to them, you and I have been talking about this and how individuals have specific differences and needs, and so this could be really important. And people can just reach out to me if they like.
Fantastic. I know you've shared or your team shared some links with me, but also for the listeners, I'll definitely include those links in the show notes so that you can go directly to the show notes and find out more about the Centenary Institute and the great work that Dr. Hansbro and his team are doing. So really appreciate you dialing in at 3 a.m. in South Africa. So really appreciate it. I can't express it as so much in terms of that commitment you're showing towards your work and supporting the health and well-being of others. So really appreciate your dedication, and please pass on the best wishes to the team and share the accolades with them, because I think you're doing marvelous work, and it's work that's much needed, because we eat every day, and if we can make a difference in terms of what we eat and how we eat it, then that can serve our health and well-being. So and people need that guidance that you're providing through the research. So thank you so much, Dr. Hansbro.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interest and the opportunity to tell you about what we and many others are doing in this area, and we really do think it has the potential to impact a lot of people. So thank you.
Massively. And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode. For those that are out there that could have respiratory diseases, or in fact any ailments related to their gut, inflammatory bowel disease, as Dr. Hansbro mentioned, asthma, this episode is really helpful for them. It's going to set them on the path that they need to really start out in terms of making that positive change, and it's something that they can do on a daily basis to have a positive effect on their disease in terms of making that progression, and to get that much guidance. And that guidance is provided in the book. I've certainly read it, and it steps you through what you need to do. So get out there, buy the book, and support Dr. Hansbro and his mission to really support people's health and well-being through eating better. So thank you again.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.